Peter Robbo, and welcome to the Downhill Slide. On this series, we're going to be meeting some of Australia's best freestyle skiers and snowboarders from times past, plus a few internationals too. So get comfy and buckle up for this podcast edition of the Downhill Slide.
I win, you lose. It's only for us two. I win, you lose.
He once rolled with the greats of skateboarding in the early bowls and ramps of California during the 80s, with the likes of Tony Hawk, Christian Hosoi and Lance Mountain. Then he started Sims in Australia with the Hill Brothers and Hardcore. One of Victorian snowboarding's founding fathers, skate historian, vert bowl rider and mad about vintage muscle cars, we're going to be meeting Noel Forsyth on this episode of the Downhill Slide.
A reason to be strong upon. Always wanted it from when you break my heart. You would try and argue with me from the start. I can live without it.
Well, g'day Noel, and welcome to the Downhill Slide. It's been quite a long time since we last saw each other. I think the last time was somewhere around 89 at that Sims Hardcore Victorian Championships you put on at Bulla. I'd like to thank you for coming on board and being ready to talk with us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, interesting idea. I mean, it sounds great because all of my stuff was maybe in the very first few years of snowboarding, only up until about 93 or 94. And after that, I'm a skate guy, you know.
They're the precious years. They're the ones we want to talk to you about.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And I guess the passing of a few of them recently and the deterioration of a couple of the others, I just thought, well, hell, if we don't get on with this, they're going to be lost forever, these stories. And I just couldn't accept that. So I thought, well, hell, you know, I've got a foot in both those camps, freestyle skiing and snowboarding. So I'm jumping right in and here we are.
Yeah, good idea. There's only one time for it. That's now. I've been working on a thing called Vic Skate History, which is, you know, it's a historic website which I put together in 2005 about the local skateboarding history. But yeah, I'm in the process of doing much the same stuff with some of my skateboarding content. So I'm putting together a book at the moment on Pinball Pool, which was the first skatable swimming pool in Sydney in like 78, 79.
All right, Noel, look, I'd like to get you to give us the good oil on yourself when you were young, where you grew up and the sports you're involved in.
I never played any kind of team sport that you would bother talking about. I don't think I'm very unusual there as a skateboarder. So it was all, for me, it was all skateboarding. When the craze hit in 1974, 75, Glen Waverley, where I'm from, and the Waverley area was kind of surf town, you know, like there were places where there were skinheads and stuff like that. But, you know, I mean, Glen Waverley was like a surf area. And therefore, when skateboarding hit, it was like literally every single kid skateboarded. I just loved it. You know, I was actually pretty, unlike everything else that I did, I was pretty good at it. You know, I was like a lanky, tall, skinny kid, but skateboarding just seemed to be something I was naturally pretty good at. You know, through the years of that craze, I was just starting to get to the point where I think I was even mildly competitive when it all basically shut down. Being a craze, it just went away. It must have been literally like some of the guys here who would tell you about the same period. There would have been maybe 50 people in Melbourne that actually kept skateboarding after the craze went. Of course, they were the true believers, the guys who were good at bank riding or slalom, where there was a little bit of slalom going on, or freestyle, and that's all there was. Of course, it was long before there were any public facilities, so skate parks didn't exist. You either found a drain, or there was a place in Carlton called the Taxi Bowl, or there were a couple of places, but they were just basically local concrete bank riding spots. There was for a very short time, there was a competition scene held at Doncaster shopping town, because back in the mid-70s there was no Sunday trading, if you remember that. So they held a couple of competitions there, and then that vanished too. After that, it really was just us keeping that thing alive. There was a bank riding spot called the Fish Pond, which is, I think, very well known in Melbourne, but that was kind of it. That was where everyone went skateboarding. That was out in Eltham. That literally was a concrete fish pond about waist deep, and it was built for a beautiful factory award prize or something. But you could, look, you could skate it. It had a little lip that went to vertical, and you could grind it and stuff. So then you're talking about 1977, 78, and we found and rode a couple of swimming pools. Very, very difficult to ride, but our first experience of riding vertical, kind of what drove skateboarding ever since, is vertical, whether it was backyard ramps. I think myself and almost everybody had something made out of tacked together plywood and a bit of PVC coping or something, Well, late 70s, early 80s, you had concrete skate parks being built by local councils. Dandenong at Doveton, Ringwood, well, at least the ones over my side. Melton came not long after as a commercial skate park. There's never been a commercial skate park that ever made any money, I don't think. Well, maybe Manly and Sydney did for a year or two. Sandboards, which we saw in Skateboarder magazine. There's a guy in the States who runs one of the skate museums, Morrow Skate Museum, was one of those sandboarding guys you'd see in Skateboarder magazine. Very shortly after that, Tom Sims and Lonnie Toft, even Caballero, some of the skate guys on early, and I've got to presume that they were pre-metal edges, but they never really showed too much of the tech side of the snowboards. And that's where we got the idea to make our own sandboards, a bit of shed time. That kind of fed into the beginning of snowboarding, but it was still long before it was the sandboarding we did was in 79 and 80 on the sand slopes on the back of Woolamai, like the safety beach side of Woolamai. And then a little while after that, we began doing a little bit of backhilling, because I knew a couple of guys who were working as towies and stuff at the snowfields. And we'd go and stay up there, myself and a guy, Hugh McKay. And we'd build sandboards or then snowboards and try them out. And they were pretty appalling, to tell you the truth. They didn't work particularly well, but it didn't matter. I mean, we just had a ball, just trying to make it work. Yeah, a good mate of mine, Mark Daniels' connection with Mount Buffalo. Yeah, so we went up there and stayed at Bright. I don't think it was 82. I think it might have been 1983. Put a bit of effort into trying to create what we thought would be a workable snowboard. I was at Camberwell Market one day, and a guy was selling this heavy, sharp, surfboard-shaped fiberglass plank, which he said, "Oh, this is a snowboard." I'm going, "Really?" I had nothing on it, like no fittings, no leg leash or strap or anything, so took him at his word and go, "Okay, well, that's a snowboard." Yeah, fitted some rubber, which I got from Clark Rubber, bolted it through, put some very heavy clear grip tape, but I put some fins on it because that seemed to be about the only way I'd get any directional stability out of it. Looking back at it now, it was terrifying because it had a leg rope on it. It weighed a lot. If you fell off it'd swing back at you, and it was a missile, I tell you. It weighed more than a modern snowboard. I nearly broke my collarbone once at Buffalo when it hit me in the shoulder. So I kind of learned from all that. But yeah, we went to Buffalo. Well, we just did backhilling. So there was the resort on one side of the road, and we were on the other side. Found a couple of things. There was some soft snow through the trees, medium pace in that soft snow. You could kind of cut a turn, I suppose, just purely by body weight and traditional sort of surf style drag your hand. But they didn't have any hold as you would say, like any kind of modern snowboard. Found a couple of things to jump off and take pictures of each other flailing through the air. Sure had a good time, but it wasn't really snowboarding because the control was not there, and not having any high backs, it just effectively it didn't work, you know. But it didn't mean, like I said, we had a ball doing it. But that was at least 3 or perhaps 4 years before there was anything like a modern board, or what you would call a modern board with high backs and metal edges. And I think we did it, I'm not sure if we did it every season in between, but we went up there and did it like 4 or 5 times. I did quite a big traveling trip to the US with a mate of mine traveling around. I had finished an apprenticeship doing metal fabrication and welding and stuff. I just went, I need a change in my life. I'm going to go traveling and then just figure out what happens when I get back. I came back from the US a couple of months later and I was out of work. I wasn't going to do metal fabrication. I started doing a little bit of signwriting work actually for the Hill brothers, who had started a skateboard import business. And that just became my job. It was sort of like they knew I knew what was going on technically with skateboards, and I was happy to talk to people because skateboard sales were just going absolutely through the roof in 1985, 86. And then straight after that, they'd only been in real large-scale business about 6 months, and they brought in a single Burton board and 2 Sims boards. Sims was not Sims with the snowboards was not part of Vision, but we had links to them obviously because of all the Sims skateboards. Became the Sims distributor. So I think all of the first season's boards were black with red high backs. I got to know them pretty well because the majority, if not all of them, broke the high backs. I think they were well known for that. But because we were selling them, and there was literally no commercial market for it at all of the first boards, which might have only been a dozen of, were sold directly to amongst ourselves. So I'd bought one for like $400 or $450 or something as soon as we could, because they came in at the beginning of cold period in maybe June or something in 86, and we took them straight up to, as I said, we had mates up at Buffalo. So we took them up there, and because I think I read something in maybe Surfing World magazine, maybe somebody had been doing it, but certainly nobody had really been doing it in the Victorian resorts that I knew about. And we took our boards to Buffalo. We started hitting the same sort of backhill track. The surface was impenetrable. And so we had a really, really tough time. So my mate Mark came over and said, look, you're wasting your time here. Come over to the runs. You'll have to show the head of ski patrol that you know what you're doing, but I can sort of see that you've got an idea, and if you can convince him, then... So that's what happened. We crossed the road, went up there, presented ourselves to this bloke, and he goes, look, if you can ride up the Pommer and come down and show me that you're in control. So riding up the Pommer in itself on a board you'd never ridden was challenging stuff. I made it up there. I think my mate Huey fell over but dragged himself back to his feet. We got up the top, and the difference once you were on a groomed run was just incredible. We just started down the hill. You know, you would probably remember the first time you did it. You do a frontside turn, you feel a bit of hold and slide, and then sort of kick it back the other way. And the moment you could link a turn, it was ridiculously easy. Not challenging slopes, but that's how it began. And we got down, the guy just goes, oh, you guys are just as good as any of the beginning skiers, off you go. And that was, as far as I know, that was the first time boards had ever been ridden on a commercial slope.
Well, that's funny you mentioned that, because there were parallel characters and we didn't know each other at the time.
Yeah.
You were one, Richard Palmer with Winterstick was another, and here I was bringing Burtons in. I'd seen an article from Richard Palmer, I think it was in Surfing World, and he became very famous for that article because it was actually the first major article on snowboarding that appeared anywhere in the world. And I remember him telling me, he said he did this article and the magazine went all around the world. And when Richard finally went overseas, he thought, oh God, I don't know anyone, but they already knew who he was because of this magazine article. They all had copies of Surfing World in Europe and America. And so he was
Yeah.
treated like small royalty. And I went to Essendon Airport and picked up the first load of Burtons back in 1981. And I get out there and I park and I'm met by a couple of customs officials and they said, there's a problem. And I said, oh, here we go. That's always a good way to start. What is it? And they said, well, we're going to charge you import duty on these things. And I said, why is that? And they said, well, it's for protection of local industries. And I said, but there is no local snowboard industry here. And he said, well, we think they're water skis.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I can see why, because they were laminated timber. They had the rubber strap bindings. The fact that screen printed onto the boards was the fact that they were a snowboard, a Burton snowboard. So they said, but they got fins like water skis. I said, but they're not water skis. Look, literally what's written on them, Burton snowboards. And I said, look, here's a brochure that I got a month ago showing what they do. And they looked at all that. And anyway, to cut a long story short, they eventually said, okay, well, they'll release them without me paying import duty. So, yeah, like you, we were super excited. I grabbed a couple of my surf buddies and we went up to Hotham in July, just at the start of the season. It was grey, the snow wasn't very good, and we just parked there along the road and just headed off down this glade, to see what was going on. And it was hairy at the start. They were barely rideable, to be honest. But
trying to sell them, I would approach every ski store, and I remember one in Elstonwick. I went in there with the Sims boards, and the guy, I mean, of course, no surprise, but he's a diehard skier and scoffing at the idea of a snowboard in itself anyway. And he goes, look, I'll give you a tip. You're on the wrong track altogether. This thing is what's going to take on skiing and has a future. He was pointing me at the swing bow. The whole idea of a swing bow, I don't know, just to me it looked like a coupe vehicle. I didn't want to laugh at the guy because he wouldn't make a sale, but he was dead set. He's going, swing bow, that's the ticket, mate.
I'll bet you that shop was Bumps Ski, wasn't it? Bumps Ski and Sports?
That's it, yep.
Yeah, Peter Haley, I think his name was. I worked with him there for a couple of years. 83 was probably about my last year in snowboarding. I'd done it for 3 years in Australia. It was going nowhere fast. I sold a couple of dozen Burton backhills. And then I just thought, well, look, this thing's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere enough. And at the time, I was also a very serious freestyle skier. So I used to take the board with me in my bag to all the comps. And if there was any decent deep stuff anywhere, I'd break it out and ride. And I remember seeing a Burton backhill board in Sun Valley, Idaho. It must have been early 1985. And I looked at it and I thought, that the only difference was that I could see is that they'd painted the deck of it red, but it still had these water ski style bindings on them and the fins and the cord through the nose. And I thought, well, that's a couple of years since I've seen one and nothing's changed.
Yeah.
And then strangely enough, I bumped into Peter from Bumps but he said, would you like to come down and work in the ski shop? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? It's a pity I wasn't there when you came in the door because we would have had a great time together and you would have had Sims boards all over the place in that shop. Anyway, I came into work one day and he said, there's something strange in the back room waiting for you. And I walked into the workshop and there was this Burton snowboard there. And I think it was a Burton Elite or something like that. This guy brought it in. He'd like to have it ski tuned. We don't know what to do with it because it doesn't really go through the grinding machine. And anyway, I got it up onto the old Toco grinder belt that we used to clean up the skis on. And I managed to clean all the scratches off the base of this thing, and I hand did all the edges for him I brought in my kit that I used to use on my skis, and I got this board looking sweet. So I thought, who was the guy? So he told me where, and he was only working down the road in Elstonwick. So I went down to meet him and walked in the door, and anyway, it turned out to be Jeff Purcell, who was great mates with Frank Penzis and Danny Monahan, and we started to talk, and he loved what I'd done with his board, and he said, I've got a friend that you should meet. And I said, who's that? And he said, oh, it's Ali Lentini. I go, no way. I said, I think Ali was my first customer in 1982 after the Melbourne Ski Show I attended for the first time. So we started to go up to the mountains a bit together. And in fact, they were the guys that dragged me up to Guthiga to the first competition that I went to, which was the Oz Classic that Kerry Pogson put on. And that's when I saw what was going on for the first time. It was a very colourful vibe around those guys. And then they were super curious that there was some older guy that had actually done this thing years before. And I got right into it. And Dean Adjic walked up to me and said, look, I'll get you on one of these. So he strapped me into one of those Avalanche 160 reflex boards, taught me how to snowboard one afternoon after the competition was over. And
at Hardcore, after that first season, things were moving pretty quick. As you said, the change to PTEX bottom, metal edges and high backs kind of meant that things were working. But we spent all of 1987 at Falls Creek. I think the more traditional ski hills of Hotham and Buller were holdouts at that time. They didn't accept it as yet. But it did move pretty quick, and from that very tight bunch of original guys that you were just talking about, it spread very quickly, because for a season or two, if you saw somebody else on a snowboard, if you didn't know them, you became friends with them pretty quickly, and you tended to know each other. And then all of a sudden it was just on. But yeah, Falls Creek was very supportive. It taught us, it wasn't very challenging, but I suppose that summit run taught us a little bit about tight turning. And then it was Hotham, which was our favourite. We ran the half pipe comp at Buller. The Hill brothers just said to me, we want to run an event, which I knew nothing about. We didn't want to just do a downhill race, because that wasn't really the focus of it. We all, of course, being skateboarders, wanted to slash and do laybacks and aerials and stuff. They gave me the use of a Skateboarder driver for the afternoon and cut a very rudimentary style half pipe that might have had three hits in it, I think. Guys, when they turned up on the morning of the competition, knew exactly what to do. Just got the shovels out and beat the thing into shape. It was kind of unfortunate. I don't think I even got to ride it, because I was organising things all day.
Where you're talking about, that was the event site that we prepared a couple of weeks earlier. And when I got up there to do this expression session, they built a quarter pipe, just a one-hit quarter pipe. I said, it's nice, but no, it's not going to do. We're going to have to build one. And they said, what is it? And I said, well, they pushed up these mountains of snow and appeared, and we sculpted and shaped this thing into some sort of rough and rudimentary shape. And then that was the event. The last time I'd set foot on Mount Buller with a snowboard, I'd basically been told I wasn't welcome, even though I'd been an instructor there, and I was racing there, and I was freestyling and things. They just said, no, you're not setting a good example, so you're welcome, but not with that thing under your arm. So
they were really anti there, weren't they? Like specifically anti-snowboard. Yeah.
And I thought, isn't that crazy? Because the very first day we rode them at Mount Hotham, we had no permission. We just pulled up and parked and started riding down this little glade and ended up at the base of a run. He actually radioed across to the mountain manager, who came over to meet us and took one look at these things and said, well, look, I have no problem with it as long as you guys don't create any trouble. So he stood around for about half an hour watching us and then skied off. One of the first times I remember riding these things back in the very early days in the States, one of the races was just going straight down the hill, the fastest run down the hill. And man, you had to have some cojones to take that one on, because by the time you were halfway down, you were scared to try and stop or turn. You just hope you could find a bailout area at the end to launch into.
We had, Sims boards progressed through to the stuff like the Switchblades and the Kidwell freestyle model. So I rode all those, but I've got to say, even Barfoot and Burton and some of those other brands had stolen the show as far as shapes and technology and materials. Sims were still using exposed timber rails at a time when things had just moved to, essentially ski construction. They should have known better. But the boards rode very well. I always liked riding them. We got approached to do Morrow. I had a bunch of Morrow boards, asymmetric cut Sims board, which I kind of liked. And that was one of those ideas that just came and went, really, the sort of asymmetric offset edges. But the Morrow boards, by the time we finished with them in about 94, 95, I really liked the way their bindings work and stuff. But I think Burton in particular had really stolen a march on everybody as far as technology and construction and testing, perhaps, And really, that kind of, I think after about 95, I wasn't getting up the hills as much as I had been. And I just became a full-time skateboarder, really. Like I dig it when I get to do it. Pushing 60 now, I'll be 60 next year. But I'm still skating vertical bowls every weekend, and every Wednesday night we light up Noble Park Skate Park. So that's enough to keep the heart pumping.
60 years old and you're still punching it in the vert bowl.
There are a couple of guys, like I suppose the majority of the guys who were good at that time, like in early to mid 80s and even late 70s, have come back to it. I think there's something about maybe the camaraderie, I don't know, but the skate guys and the snowboard guys, you're talking about the same crew, really, but they're just a great bunch of blokes. You wouldn't even call it an organisation. It's just a group. MOS, which is Melbourne Old School Skaters. If we are petitioning a council for an event or a new facility, then we're very organised. But we skate mostly in groups of 15 or 20 guys every weekend, always on vert. We don't really we like banks and stuff, but it's all about vertical, really. I've been into photography for a long time now. Love taking the photos and flash photography for the night action shots and stuff, but I dig it, and I just love skating.
I think you touched on an interesting point there before about brotherhood of board riders that still stays together. And many of us haven't seen each other for a very, very, very long time. They still remember you still remember them. They remember the importance of the things that we did and at the time that we did them. It meant something then and it still means something to them now. But I don't recall any sports where I'm still sitting down and talking like we are today. 30-something years ago, I guess, when we all stepped into these things, we had no idea we'd be doing this and that we'd still be doing it and that would actually have affected our lives in the way that it has.
I think, again, like what you were just saying, because I collected photos of everybody skateboarding in the day. That's how I ended up with enough stuff to make a website. But even though nobody outside of our group was taking any notice of it, I always thought it was quite important, purely because at that point, nobody had ever done it before. Nobody had, before 1977, nobody had built a vertical backyard ramp. Nobody had skateboarded a pool or done an aerial, maybe, 12 months behind the US in that regard, but it was something entirely new. And that was exactly the same situation with snowboarding as it developed, because it was entirely new. Like, it was kind of fun in a way, trying to convince mountain operators that you were something other than a bunch of idiots, a moving force that's going to eventually, take over a large part of your business. I suppose these days they'd be crippled without it, right? It's a massive sector. You couldn't be competitive at it at all without spending that massive amount of time on the mountain. My friends and I were good snowboarders and partially competitive over the first couple of years, but it didn't stop me digging it. But it was a little disappointing to be blown into the weeds by the young hotshots a couple of years later.
We put that first event together at Buller in '89, a whole shift in focus, which was arriving into the alpine snow sports world in Australia, was impressive. And I thought, well, this is going to be something I want to stick around with and see how this one pans out, because all the guys showed up from the different resorts, from Hotham, from New South Wales, etc. Channel 9 Wide World of Sports came up to film it. I remember Anne-Marie Sparkman saying to me, She said, "Is it always like this?" And I said, "I have no idea. This is the first time I'm really witnessing this too." So I
No,
said, just enjoy it and get the great footage, because I said one day we'll probably look back on this and have a really good laugh. So I just want to ask you, Noel, after all this time you've spent in skateboarding and snowboarding, what do you think you've learned?
it's a little hard for me to separate the activity and the business, because I got into skateboarding and snowboarding through the business of it. I worked in that line for well over 30 years. I learned so much about not just the technical side of the design part, because I ended up being a shoe designer for skateboarding shoes for the last 20 years of that, but how to go about marketing a product, how to present it to the public, how to advertise and promote. I learned a ton of stuff about that, about how to design, market, and sell a product, which I really enjoyed doing. It's hard for me to separate that out from the activity itself. My love of, I'll be a skateboarder until I break too many bones to be able to do it. But these days, I'm trying to get in the water more and surf. I suppose the thing that I have learned and now love is that it allows me to stay fit and healthy at an age where most guys are just sitting on the couch, whether that's skateboarding a couple of times a week or going surfing. So I think what I've learned is that I can grow old gracefully still doing it, which is a hell of a bloody thing, because in most sports it's just simply not possible. The kids are just sensational. So the cool part for me, I think, is that, like I said, I'm pushing 60, but I'm spending time doing that with kids who are 10, and we're just doing the same thing for the same reason and digging it. So I don't think that's really that easy to do in other sports. But I skate with a lot of fellas who their kids are young hotshots and come up through the ranks, and it is a fantastic bonding thing. Surfing and skateboarding, and I'm sure snowboarding, are all exactly the same in that way. If your dad can pull some nice, tight, fast lines downhill, you go, that wasn't too bad, was it?
What advice would you give to young people trying to take it up these days, snowboarding or skating? What would you say to them?
I'm gushingly over the top firstly about skateboarding, because that's just what I do, but snowboarding would be exactly the same. I just think that they're fantastic activities. I know that skateboarding's doing exceptionally well, had an enormous commercial resurgence during COVID. Now, maybe that's just purely because it is something you can do. Like the footy teams couldn't play, the guys couldn't go out and practice. Maybe it's just purely because you could, but I think that there is a resurgence going on. Skateboarding flows directly into snowboarding, so I presume that's just got to be one will follow the other. Like I say, I'm not really snowboarding actively at the moment, but I skate with kids a lot, and man, they've got this energy that I suppose it just keeps it rolling strongly. Like I really love taking photos of them, because a lot of these hotshot kids can do amazing stuff and like pull it out on demand. And as a photographer, I'm very demanding.
Well, Noel, it's been absolutely fantastic to catch up with you. I still remember the day I walked into your office at Hardcore there and picked up a Sims half pipe model off you, and I still regret selling that board even today. And strange enough, that was when Mount Buller started to take a little bit of notice of me flying around, because in the end I just said to hell with it. Whether we're welcome or whether we're not, I'm doing it. And they started to ease up a little bit just prior to the event, their homecoming. That was their big event. They wanted to say, well, now we're opening the doors to this thing. And I wonder if they don't regret their decision. Because there was some hell broke loose during that event you ran and that event I ran, but that was just a sign of things to come, and that was the beauty of it, I thought. So
yeah, bunch of fun times.
And as you are almost some sort of superhero these days, still skateboarding vert bowls at the age of 60, if there was one thing in this world you could change, what do you think it would be?
Well, it's not going to be anything to do with skateboarding. I'm a bit of a passionate climate change guy. So I think that's the thing that's got to be uppermost in everybody's mind. Well, definitely for the snow guys, right? It's just not getting around it. But things are moving very, very quickly in the right direction there. But because Australia has been so strong with solar and now with wind energy, things are moving very rapidly in the right direction there.
Well, it's about time, isn't it?
It is, yeah, exactly. You know, we've waited a long time. This wave that's just cresting, right? It's just going to wipe out everything to do with coal. In 10 years, it'll be gone and it'll be history.
Well, we hope so. Otherwise, there might not be any snow for us to go and ride. So that's become the big issue for us.
Yeah.
All right, Noel, well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. As I said earlier, I'd like to thank you for coming on board this edition of the Downhill Slide. It's been absolutely a delight to hear what you've got to say, and I'm very stoked for you that you still have this passion inside you. And another thing I want to mention is I love that old ride of yours, that Fairlane. I used to have a 65 Ford, and like my Sims half pipe, I miss her every day too.
Yeah. I'm still running old cars. So I don't think my first car was a XM Falcon hardtop, gorgeous thing I had for 25 years. And now I've got a early Plymouth Barracuda, and I love the old cars. So cheers, mate.
Well, we'll see you up on the hill because it's all downhill from here.
Thanks, champ. All the best.
Well, that's a wrap for this edition. Hope you enjoyed it. And remember to comment and subscribe below. I'm Peter Robbo, and we'll do this again soon with another take on the Downhill Slide.